y'all so much for coming and giving me the opportunity to talk with you today about the issues that are facing District 70 in the state of Louisiana. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll open it up for questions. I'll tell you, like I tell my students all the time, I don't like to sit up here and just speak. I like to interact with people, so I hope we can use this as a conversation between people who have a vested interest in how the state of Louisiana is doing. I was born and raised right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My mom's a retired public school teacher, and my dad's a retired chemical plant worker. 14 years ago, my husband and I, Dan Davis, who's here with me today, we were living in Michigan, where I was teaching at Michigan State, and got a call from LSU offering me a job. And we jumped at the chance to come home because we wanted to be able to raise our boys close to family. And then also, I'll be honest, we were Southerners living in Michigan. It was really cold. We were ready to come home. So we moved home 14 years ago. And I have to say that while it has been really great to be home, I've become increasingly worried that my 3 boys are not going to be able to make the same decision to either come home or stay in Louisiana, because a state that systematically disinvests in education from early childhood all the way to higher ed is not a state that is going to be ready for the economy of the future, and is not going to be able to provide our children the quality of life that they deserve. And so 8 of the 14 years that I was here at LSU were under the administration of Governor Jindal, right? And it was really hard to be in higher education in the Jindal administration. It was more about more than just our budgets. It was about a lack of understanding about what higher education is supposed to do for a state. And so during those years of frozen funding, I had to tell students that I couldn't print copies for them because I was out of toner and my department couldn't buy anymore. I lost a lot of colleagues during that time who moved off to other states. And as I say, kind of as a joke, some of those poor things, God bless them, had to move to College Station, right? They are living in College Station and working at Texas A&M because our state and our legislature refused to invest in its flagship university and any other university around the state. And so those were hard years, but while those years were going on, I was doing what I do as a scholar, which is public policy research. So I do a lot of work on return on investment. I evaluate the programs that the state has to see whether or not they're effective and whether or not they are producing a return on investment for taxpayers. So, and what I'm doing in this research is that I'm uncovering that Louisiana, because it refused to invest in the policies and the programs that serve its citizens, we are leaving millions and millions of dollars in federal matching funds on the table, right? A great example would be in the Workforce Commission vocational rehabilitation service training, right? This trains individuals who deal with blindness or deafness, some physical limitation, and what it does, it allows them to receive job training so that they can fulfill their best potential. And the federal government matches funds to that program. For every $1 Louisiana spends, the federal government will give you 3, right? A 3-to-1 match. Louisiana leaves about 1/3 of its federal money on the table year after year after year. And my study showed that when we invest in that program, those individuals are able to increase their income so that they are above the poverty line, economically self-sufficient, and saving us tax dollars. And meanwhile, we're letting Arkansas have our money. Because when Louisiana doesn't invest, it's not like it saves the taxpayer at the federal level money. Other states that will invest in their people get those funds. I was also doing work on early childhood related issues in the state, and was the co-author of a report called Losing Ground, which was the first of its kind in the country, which assessed the problems that women and men in our state, right, these working families, the problems they have with their child care. That study showed that women are turning down full-time employment. They are turning down promotions because of quality child care issues. And that's not just a problem for those families, it's a problem for businesses. We quantified the amount of money that businesses are losing every year because of their problems with child care, their employees' problems. And this study has now been replicated across the country. So I'm doing this work, and but the important thing to remember too about that quality child care issue, right, is that while I'm doing that study, the governor was systematically eliminating state funding for early childhood. Governor Jindal was wiping those state dollars out, and then later we come back and we find that that's costing taxpayers money because we are not investing in early childhood. So I'm doing all of this, I'm doing my research, I'm watching my colleagues leave, and I've got 3 boys in public schools, right? So I'm selling world's finest chocolate, wrapping paper, Yankee candles, whatever I can to supplement the stagnant education funding that's happening in the state. And so these are dark times for me as a parent and as a researcher. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, how can I make a difference? And I can tell you that I was at the legislature lobbying for increased funding for early childhood, lobbying for increased funding for public schools, not as a part of an organization, as a mom, right? Out there telling our legislature that they needed to invest in our children. And I was also advocating for higher education as a member of the LSU Faculty Senate. And I'll say, people sometimes ask me, why do I talk so much about Bobby Jindal, right? That Governor Edwards has been our governor for 4 years. And I will tell you, things are better, right? The state for the first time in a long time has had some budget surpluses that they've been able to reinvest in other programs, like fixing our crumbling roads and bridges, right? Giving early childhood just a little bit of money, not even close to what it needs, right? We are turning a corner. But the problem is that we have a lot of politicians who are running for office around our state and in this city who think that that budget surplus is a bad idea, right? They want to go back to the days of starving our state agencies that take care of our most vulnerable citizens. And I'll close when people tell you kind of, why am I doing this, right? Because I have a lot on my plate. I'm a mom, I have a full-time job. Why am I running? Well, I had a conversation with my brother-in-law in the garden in Washington Parish while I was hoeing my father's 24 tomato plants that he insisted on planting this summer. And so my brother-in-law, he asked me, he said, Belinda, why are you doing this? You've got kids to take care of, you have a career that you really care about, your parents are aging, what motivates you to do this? And when Governor Jindal was in office and I was at the legislature advocating for public education, I watched the parents of children with disabilities put on their yellow shirts and bring their disabled children to the Capitol in wheelchairs, hooked up to portable ventilators, to beg our legislators for funding that would allow them to continue to care for their children in their own home. And under Governor Edwards, it's been better. They're still there and they're still coming, but they're asking for additional funds to remove thousands of children off the wait list for that program. And I firmly believe that there are enough of us in Louisiana who don't want that to be the normal. That's not the way a state that cares about its future and cares about its children does things. And so I'm running to make a difference. I'm running, and I can tell you that every decision I make as a legislator is going to be made through the lens of what does this do to help Louisiana's working families. So I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Sure.
You're in a running for a seat that for the past generation has been a Republican seat. What makes you think that you have a shot with the D behind your name?
Because I have a very moderate district that is in the heart of what we call the Gissel Belt from Sharon Weston Broom's race. So it's a well-educated district. So over 50% of the individuals in the district have a college degree or more, and they tend to base their decisions on who they're going to vote for on more than partisanship. Right, they're looking at the candidate, and so and the question that he asked was, "What I'm in a district that's been held by Republicans for quite some time. What makes me think that I can win it?" And so I know that there is a big swath of moderate voters in my district. We have a lot of independents in the district as well, and my polling data shows that they like my connection to LSU. They like my advocacy for public schools because I've been there fighting the fight when I didn't have to, when I was just a mom and a researcher, they like that commitment. And I'd also tell you too, quite frankly, right, my opponent, Ms. Freiberg, right, she has had 4 elections in the last decade, and in this most recent election, more Republicans voted for someone else than voted for her. Yes, sir.
You're an LSU professor, you're sort of academic. LSU's population of students has not increased, but in the last few years has gone from 1 out of 5 students being an out-of-state student to now 1 out of 4. I understand Alabama, 50% of the students are out-of-state, so if we had the same number of population, that means LSU's educating fewer and fewer Louisianians. Would you in the legislature, would you support a resolution that LSU has a limit of how many out-of-state students versus Louisiana poor students it has to educate?
Okay, so the question was, it talked a little bit about the fact that LSU is increasing the number of out-of-state students that it's educating, and should there be a resolution in the legislature asking LSU to focus on in-state graduates. And so I'll say a couple of things. So first, it is very important that Louisiana focus on moving its high school graduates into college, right? Because we have a desperate need for college graduates where there are studies that show we're not keeping pace with the number of college degrees that we need to produce in order to keep our economy growing and those jobs filled. And so I think that LSU does need to focus on homegrown Louisiana students. But I'll tell you, there's also the reality of the budget. And the budget situation, right, the cuts to higher education, and this is not just true for LSU, means that universities have to target out-of-state students because of their increased tuition dollars. And so if we want LSU to turn its focus exclusively to students in Louisiana, then we've got to fund LSU in a manner that would allow them to do that. And right now, the state has abdicated that responsibility. And so, you know, they're in a quandary about how to be financially solvent as a university, and then also do what I think is really important. We're a land grant university. We have a mission to serve the people of Louisiana, and I think that it's very important that we do exactly that. So I don't know that a resolution, to make sure that I answer your question, that a resolution is the right way to go, and that it should even be LSU specific, right? If we're going to talk about higher education serving Louisiana students, we need to make sure that we're looking at it on the whole. Yes, sir.
LSU recently joint venture participated with a private company in the development of $100 million worth of apartments on Nicholson Drive. That has severely impacted the real estate market, rental market in the LSU area. Are you in favor of that?
So I'm not opposed in theory to public-private partnerships. I think that LSU, the public-private partnerships that have been going on to expand on-campus housing are a result of the fact that research, so study after study shows that freshmen who live on campus graduate at higher rates than freshmen who live off campus, and they're more successful in their freshman year, which is crucial to their long-term success at university. So LSU is expanding its housing in order to make sure that it has enough space on campus to house freshmen. But I am sympathetic to the argument that, you know, if you go down Burbank, all you see are these giant apartment complexes that are catering to students. And so I'm sympathetic to the needs of real estate owners in the area and making sure that their buildings are full, but LSU's major obligation is to its students and its tuition-paying parents and making sure that they graduate. Does that answer your question?
It's severely impacted that economy.
Right. So it's, you know, it's a difficult balancing act. Yes, sir.
With your attitudes of what's happened in Louisiana, you mentioned the general administration. Couldn't you be a Republican and still have the exact same attitudes? Is it necessary that you had to be a Democrat? It seems to me that you could be a Republican and have these exact same findings. Could you just speak on that?
So the question was, I had to basically, why am I a Democrat? That my talking points appear that I could also be a Republican. I couldn't be a Republican because I think that Democratic Party in the state of Louisiana has consistently opposed the devastating budget cuts in our state that have dramatically impacted the most vulnerable people in our state, and that's children. And I'll just say that it's very hard to be a moderate Republican in the state of Louisiana's legislature. Just ask the gentleman sitting in the back, Representative Shadowin, or ask Julie Stokes, right? That if you there's not room for that. And I actually, I had a conversation with my opponent on exactly that issue, that there will be no room for her to be a moderate Republican in the House, and that's why she's not going to be able to accomplish the things that she thinks she wants to accomplish. And that's why I'm better served to do that, right? There's a lot riding on this seat in particular, right? So we have a supermajority of Republicans in the Senate already, right? That's done. They can override a gubernatorial veto in the Senate. It is in all likelihood going to come down to the District 70 seat stopping a Republican supermajority in the House. And so that matters whether or not Governor Edwards is reelected or we end up with Mr. Risponi, right? This seat is important because the most devastating things that were done under the Jindal administration, like budget cuts and a whole host of other issues, require that supermajority of votes. And I want to be able to stand in the face, like some people have said, the buck stops with Belinda, right? Well, that's a lot of pressure, but it actually may be true. And then I'll get you.
What is your position on ITEL? Do you favor the governor's approach, or do you favor going back to the rubber stamp board?
Okay, so the question was, what's my position on ITEP? And I will tell you that flat out, I favor local control over ITEP decisions. It is incredibly difficult to get local governments and local citizens to agree to taxes, right? Getting a tax passed is hard work. And so when local communities agree to tax themselves to pay for law enforcement, to pay for education, to pay for their infrastructure, the state government has no business coming in and usurping the will of local governments, right, and their citizens. It's not a good model. And I'm sympathetic to the plight of businesses when they say they want consistency. Okay, well now local governments have figured out how they are going to assess these ITEP applications and to do it in a consistent manner. So now that consistency is there for businesses, and so they know what they have to do to be granted an ITEP exemption by local governments. And so I am absolutely opposed to returning it to the rubber stamp, right? Consistency doesn't have to be a rubber stamp. It just has to be knowing what to expect. And let me get you.
Walking the neighborhoods in your district, which is kind of an interesting district. You go from South Downs to Ardere. You've got some interesting different neighborhoods. What are the issues that most of your constituency be talking about?
Right. So he asked, what are some of the issues that my constituency talks about? Well, I'll say that there are probably two big ones. One, they worry about education issues, and then the second one is what everybody in Louisiana worries about, which is infrastructure, right? We have decades long backlogs of infrastructure needs in our state, and that's why I'm going to take the lead as a legislator to work across the aisle with both parties. And I'm going to ask the gubernatorial candidates to support a special session that is dedicated to infrastructure. And I'll tell you why we have to do that. This problem is too big to be handled inside a regular session when there are all the myriad of pressures working on legislators, right? We need to be able to sit down in a special session to look at the full array of tools that we have in our toolbox for fixing our infrastructure needs and to focus on that without any distractions. And special sessions, they do cost money, but guess what else costs you money? $2,000 a year in Baton Rouge is being spent on car repairs because our roads are so crappy, right? So we have to be able to take a look at this problem and look at it for the long haul. Let's figure out a way in that special session to say we know that we have this much need and that needs, this much that needs to be spent on roads and bridges and repairs to infrastructure. And let's come up with a formula that allows us to chip away at that year after year after year. And is that going to be hard? Yes. But there's no more kicking this problem down the road, right? We have to deal with it, and we need to deal with it now. 20% of bridges in Baton Rouge are structurally deficient, right? This is not, what we're doing is not working. And so I'm asking us to think outside the box and to sit down and focus on it with a single-minded focus so that we can solve this problem.
Belinda,
Yes, sir.
I do a TV show. I'm a host of a TV show called Paradise Louisiana. 18 years. We deal with a lot of things that of big interest to Louisiana outdoors. Okay, and for 18 years, we in a way get involved with controversy. The last legislative session, some of the controversy was state management of the fisheries in the Gulf. Okay. And they had some both sides, but solved some of that problem. Coming up, it started last time. It's coming up some major things that will be in the legislature: land use, the right to barricade canals in the marsh, diversion canals, but they benefit hurting the fishery. A lot of things that have got multiple sides to it. You always say they got two sides, they got 3 or 4 sides to some of these things. How abreast are you on some of the things, if anybody brought to you, some of these things that's going to be coming up in the legislature, so you're going to have to deal with it?
Okay. So he asked me to talk about kind of some of the land use issues and the diversion issues that are affecting fisheries on the coast. I will tell you that no one has brought any of these issues to me before, so this is a first, but I can tell you I do know that the diversion from the Mississippi is creating, I mean, when we've been at high flood stage, has been creating catastrophic problems in the Gulf Coast for our fishing industry, for our oyster industry. So I know that there are issues that are going to have to be dealt with regarding that, and but I can say that, so I don't know a lot about that right now, but I will tell you that I'm committed to learning about it, and I would be happy to sit down with you, and you could lay out for me all of the different issues, and we'll sit down and talk about it.
I'm gonna get you in touch with people on both sides.
Okay.
That's not the best way to do it.
Absolutely.
It is building land. I mean, some of them building land on Chapter. There's big controversy. They got people that would take you and show you. They offer to anybody that wants to go and see both sides of this. Ryan Lambert is one of them. Elijah, he'll take you out, show you the benefits. There are definitely some benefits. There are definitely some hazards for what they're doing. Now, opening the Bonacare Spillway caused a lot of trouble all the way to Mississippi.
It did.
But it also increases a lot of fish being caught up in close freshwater fish diversion. There's multiple sides, but it would be a good idea,
Right.
even if you don't win, to learn about this.
Well, I
It's
appreciate
an
that.
economic problem, too.
Well, and that, it's a complex problem, and as a public policy scholar, that's something that I spend a lot of time doing, like looking at how interlocking issues work together. So I would be happy to learn more about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Belinda, I wanted to know your thoughts on criminal justice reform and your interest in working toward that.
So the question was, what are my thoughts on criminal justice reform, and do I have any interest in working on that? So I think that the criminal justice reforms that Louisiana has enacted are absolutely a step in the right direction. Our status as the #1 incarcerator in the United States, right, is unsustainable from a budget perspective, and it's just not smart policy, right? What we should be doing is what those bills allow us to do, which is to release nonviolent offenders and to use the dollars that we are saving by not having them incarcerated to invest in support structures that allow them to reestablish themselves as in the community as working taxpayers. Right? Allow them to participate in the wonderful apprenticeship programs that our unions are running in our state, right? So that they can become, tax-paying members who are contributing to our society. And so I'm for that. And I think that, that ultimately those dollars that we're saving from incarceration, we reinvest them in the prisons so that people are able to to be supportive when they, and not be recidivists, right? And then when we're so successful at that, which I think we will be, we can use those savings to invest in other things like early childhood education or higher education or more money for our roads and bridges, which would allow us to bring down federal matching dollars, right? So it's time for us to get smart about how we're spending our money. Yes.
I read in the Backers Business Report last week that the money from the surplus will be allocated in 3 ways. The rainy day fund to pay down some debt, and the overwhelming majority of it will be used to pay expenses for the 2020 legislative session. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's good that we are reinvesting that money in the rainy day fund and to help stabilize our pensions. So our pensions have been moving in the right direction, unlike a lot of states. I mean, we've made serious progress towards stabilizing our pension fund, and so I think that that's a good thing. I don't know do you remember the exact numbers on how much was going to be invested in the 2020 session?
It's almost 60%.
Almost 60%. Well, that seems like a lot, right? And so I would be interested to know how that number compares to what we've spent on previous legislative sessions to see if it's an outlier, right? So because what you want is predictability in session expenses, and so I'd like to look at that.
I think it's 60% for the legislature to spend.
Oh, so I misunderstood the question. So it's 60% for the legislature to spend at will?
No, to roll over into the 2020.
20 budget. Okay. So,
Which makes sense.
right. Yes. So so I guess the question is, what's the problem with using the dollars from the budget surplus to reinvest in Louisiana's people and the policies that serve them?
That's not how it was worded. It was for expenses associated with the session.
Okay. Well, yes.
A portion of your district is located in the proposed boundaries for St. George. What is your take on the incorporation? And if it does in fact get incorporated, how would that inform the work you do in the legislature?
Okay. That's a great question. He asked about my position on the St. George incorporation and how that might impact my job as a legislator. So I'll just tell you that I, unlike my opponent, have a visible and on-the-record opposition to St. George, right? So 8 years ago, when they were just there about their school district, I helped organize a group of moms into a group called One Community, One School District, and we successfully fought that school district in the legislature 3 years in a row because it was irresponsible from a taxpayer perspective. They were going to try to leave the East Baton Rouge Parish Public School System with bonded indebtedness and legacy retiree costs, just like this new city tried to do in this last session, right? This last session, before they were ever incorporated, they tried to saddle the taxpayers of District 70 and the rest of the city of Baton Rouge with bonded indebtedness that they are responsible for and for pension costs that they are responsible for. And so I was there once again, just as a citizen, to testify about the financial devastation that a decision like that causes. Because I know right now, we've seen it happen. This is what happens with breakaway school systems, right? Zachary, Central, and Baker walked away from their bonded indebtedness. They walked away from their legacy retiree cost, and now close to $1,000 per child in the East Baton Rouge Parish Public School System goes to cover what those school systems should have been responsible for. And that is not fair, and it's not right. And as your legislator in District 70, I am going to make sure that that does not happen to the city of Baton Rouge. You will have a voice that is going to stand up for that because I understand the issues. And quite frankly, it's shocking to me that Barbara Freiberg was not there fighting the breakaway school system in the legislature when she was on the school board, and she was not there as a member of the Metro Council to lobby against those amendments that would have left District 70 saddled with somebody else's debt. I'm sorry, I get a little fired up about that one. So, yes.
The comment about the 60% of the surplus going to a session, 2020 session, That would be, if we have a $500 million surplus, $300 million for a session. With all of the sessions that we had in 16, 17, and 18, they averaged between, I don't know, 600, 700,000 up to $1 million. Nowhere close to 300 million. So I don't know where the source is, but we do not spend $300 million on legislation.
It's possible I misread it.
No, just from my experience.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
It's my understanding the legislature get to decide how the money gets spent, and it can only be spent on one-time expenses.
That's correct.
Because it's carryover.
Right.
Yes, sir.
How would you vote on abolishing the death penalty, and why?
He asked, how would I vote on abolishing the death penalty and why? That is a really interesting question, and it's one that my husband and I have actually debated quite a bit because he's a former law enforcement officer, and we have debates about the usefulness of the death penalty as a deterrent from crime. I will just tell you, just from my heart, as a Christian, I believe in giving people every opportunity to come to the saving knowledge of Christ. And so for me, the death penalty artificially stops that opportunity for them to repent and find grace. And so I would vote for abolishing the death penalty in the state of Louisiana if it were to come before me. And I'll also say as well, it's expensive. It's just an incredibly inefficient return on our investment from taxpayers from a public policy perspective. And then also we have a problem in our country when it comes to making sure that individuals are actually guilty of crimes, right? And so there is no going back, there is no do-over when you find out that a man that you have executed, that DNA evidence exonerates him. And that's just, I'm willing to err on the side of caution and keep him locked up for the rest of his life rather than take his life and find out that we made a mistake.
You're a PhD, and I can imagine at LSU Medical School you could go through and get great grades, but performing open heart surgery is a team. It's a practical thing. And I can't imagine them sending you in to operate just because you've got great grades. You'd probably sew somebody up or something first. You're jumping, instead of a council person, a person on the school board or other, for our highest legislature area for the entire state of Louisiana. Don't you think you should have some practical experience where you could show you actually work with people and get things done first instead of this level of advancement?
Okay, so he asked me whether or not I'm, essentially kind of a paraphrase, whether or not I'm qualified to be in the legislature because I have not held office previously. And so the answer to that is yes, I am qualified to hold office according to the Louisiana Constitution, first of all. And then second, as a public policy scholar, I bring a level of expertise to the legislature that most legislators don't have, right? I study policy, efficiency, and effectiveness for my job. And so I want to bring that to the legislature. When we're passing legislation, are we requiring agencies to collect the data that is necessary to show that that program works and that it's returning investment for taxpayers? So that would be one reason. And the second reason is because I've been at the legislature for the past 10 years advocating for Louisiana working families just as an average citizen, right? I have been there repeatedly advocating for the programs that are going to improve the lives of Louisiana's children. And I think that qualifies me to ask for your vote. And I have to earn it, right? But I have the right to ask for it. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
We had more women qualified to run for the legislature than ever before, but it looks like we're going to end up with about the same number of female legislators. What happened? is that?
So he asked, we had more women who were running for office than ever before, but it looks like we're going to end up with about the same number. What happened? Well, you know, there's a lot of research out there that shows that when women decide to run and when they can raise enough money to run an effective race, they're about as successful as their male counterparts. And so in Louisiana, you know, I am a beneficiary of Emerge Louisiana, which trained me to run for office. And so that was an incredibly beneficial program for me. But, you know, the sad reality is, like Louisiana, we rank, I think it's second to last in the percentage of our legislature that's comprised of women. And that's bad for all of us. Right? All the political science research out there shows that legislators and legislatures work best when they look like the citizens that they're serving. All right? And so we're not going to get there, as you said, this year, right? We're not even going to come close to 50% of a legislature being female, right? I mean, so the result is, okay, what do we do, right? If we are not increasing the number of women that are running for office, let's put the women who are there in leadership positions. Right? Because studies also show that women are more collaborative by nature, and God knows we need some collaboration to solve the big problems that are facing the state of Louisiana. Yes, sir.
Follow-up, we had a CPA run for Secretary of State. She brought a CPA background, and certainly you can hire CPAs. Why does that make your experience as a PhD mean that you're qualified? But another question to that would be, are you in favor of the new bridge?
Okay, all right, so those were two very diverse questions. Sure, so the first question, I'll take the second question first. Am I in favor of a new bridge? And so the answer to that question is yes. Right? But then the question once again is how to pay for it, right? And so we've had a lot of discussions in Louisiana about public-private partnerships trying to pay for that bridge. But public-private partnerships come with tolls and a price tag, right? And the studies show that we don't have enough traffic to support a toll that would make a public-private partnership reasonable, right? I think the experts said it was going to be like a $25 a person toll to go over the new bridge, right, with a public-private partnership. Clearly, that is not going to work, which is why I go back to my idea of a special session that is dedicated to infrastructure and transportation needs so that we can take a long-term, serious look at how we're going to solve our infrastructure and our transportation problems. And so the first question was, again, about my qualifications to run for office, and I believe Julie Stokes running for office. And so Julie Stokes was a fabulous legislator. We are going to miss her dearly in the legislature. She brought a sense of bipartisanship and a common sense financial approach to her decision making. And she was unsuccessful in that race because it was a really crowded field, right? That was part of it. But, you know, ultimately, here's what I'll tell you. It's up to the voters to decide if I'm qualified to run for office. And I will put my practical experience as a policy evaluator up against most legislators that are there in that legislature today. And, you know, I have a serious work ethic. I have a serious sense of compassion for the people of Louisiana. And I'm not short-sighted about decision making. If I run and I have to make decisions that I believe are in the best interest of the people of Louisiana, and I am a one-term legislator, then so be it. Because I'm tired of us kicking the can down the road. We have hard decisions that have to be made about transportation. We have hard decisions to be made about how we're going to prioritize education in my kids' futures and your children's and your grandchildren's futures. And I'm the person to make that decision. I can do this job. Yes, sir.
You mentioned infrastructure. How much backlog, how many dollars of backlog infrastructure is there?
Billions. They asked how much of a backlog in infrastructure, right? I mean, we have, you know, billions and billions of dollars that need to be raised in order to address it. And I'm not saying we can't do this overnight, right? This is a program or a policy that is going to have to be in effect for 20 or 30 years, right? But if we sit down and we say, what are reasonable chunks and reasonable ways to move forward. Like, how much do we need to raise and spend each year to chip away at it, right? To keep current on our current needs and to chip away at the backlog.
Two-part question. There's $14 billion is what's been published in the paper. How much money has the state diverted from the federal trust fund over the last 25 years for salaries and benefits?
Okay, so the question is, how much has the state diverted from the federal trust fund to pay for salaries and benefits?
For the state employees.
Okay, so I do not know the answer to that question.
It's $12 billion.
Okay.
For the last 25 years.
Right, and so that's something, right, when you're in the legislature, right, this is something that needs to be addressed in terms of where are we spending our money and how are we spending it? Are we spending it wisely, right? And so the number that you've just given me, though, doesn't account for the fact that some of those salaries and some of those benefits were people who are working on our roads and bridges, right? And so those kinds of things have to be accounted for when you look at that big number. So it's very easy to be misleading with numbers when you're not unpacking them, right? And so what I'd want to know is what percentage of that was going for people who are working on our roads and bridges?
Well, none of it went into construction. It all went into salaries and benefits. It went into state salaries and benefits. Federal money dedicated to federal roads that went into state salaries.
Right. Well, but you can't build roads and bridges without people, and you have to pay them, right? So,
People behind the desk.
well, I guess I'd have to say that people behind desks are also valuable when it comes to planning and assessing where to spend our money. But so, we just probably have, a difference of opinion perhaps on this, and then I promise that I will go and I will become educated when I'm in the legislature about that particular issue. That's one thing I can do. I can learn, and I'm a hard worker.